The Welsh Assembly has voted to implement an opt-out organ donor system. This means that in 2 years' time, every resident in Wales over the age of 18 will be presumed to have given consent to donate their organs when they die. At the moment, people must sign the NHS Organ Donor Register, or their families must agree before their organs can be used after their death. Under the new system, there will be two forms of consent in law: deemed consent by those people who have not registered to opt out, and express consent by those who have registered to say they wish to be a donor. However, there has been opposition to the changes from some groups, including Christian churches, and from within the Muslim and Jewish communities. They wanted a so-called soft opt-out scheme in the legislation which would give deceased patients' families a say on donation if their relative had neither opted in or out. The Welsh Government hopes the legislation will lead to a rise in the number of donors by around 25%. The debate goes to the heart of what lengths will go to save a human life. What are the rights and wrongs of organ donation? Well, to discuss this and the issues surrounding it, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Nigel Burton. He's the Vice Chairman of the Donor Family Network. Also here in the studio is Terry Mullins. He's the Vice Chairman of the North London Humanist Group. And also here is Professor David Katz. He's Emeritus Professor of Immunopathology at University College, and he's also a member of the Board of Deputies. On the line, I'm joined by Julie Morgan, who is a member of the Welsh Assembly for Cardiff North. Also on the line is Roger Goss, Director of the campaign group Patient Concern. Julie Morgan, is this the most significant vote that's gone through the Welsh Assembly?
Oh yes, definitely. The Welsh Assembly has only had primary lawmaking powers since early 2011, so this has been the most significant vote, and it was debated at great length. Everybody had a chance to have their say, and it was something that's actually been contemplated, I think, for about 5 years. So it was a fitting culmination this week.
David Katz, do you think this will improve the number of donors?
I don't think there's evidence that it will improve the number of donors. I find it actually extraordinary to regard this as the priority healthcare issue that the Welsh Assembly is tackling.
Your response to that, Julie Morgan?
Yes, well, certainly we have people who are dying on the waiting list for donors, and I think at the moment there's 230-odd people actually waiting for organ transplants in Wales. It's estimated, I think, that sort of one person in Wales every week dies waiting for an organ transplant. You know, and I've met many of these people, and in a health service, when you are able to help these people, I think it's our duty to do so.
Nigel Burton.
You can understand why people think that going for an opt-out system would actually increase the numbers. But if you look at things like Spain, they often hold Spain up as being the great panacea for how organ donation should be done. But Spain adopted an opt-out system 5 years before they got their real increase on their donation rates. So it wasn't the opt-out was the thing that did it for Spain. There's other reasons why Spain is so good at organ donation. So going for this opt-out system, I don't think will change the system or change the number of donors.
Terry Mullins, people are feeling anxious because it means somehow the state owns your body. What do you think of that?
Well, once you're dead, I don't think it matters who owns your body. But you're dead, you're dead. And if you've got pieces and bits and pieces that you can donate, or not donate, but can be taken and used, I think it'd be outrageous if they weren't taken.
Roger Goss from Patient Concern. It would be outrageous if these perfectly good organs, which could save the lives of somebody else, were not taken and used.
It would be equally outrageous if they were taken if people didn't want them taken. To suggest that nobody cares who owns the body when a person is dead, of course, is not very sensible, because the relatives may in fact have loved the person involved for a very long time. They may be everything to them, and this really isn't a very ethical way to approach the thing at all. I would just make one point in response to the representative from the Assembly. The vote got through because the Labour Party, who have half the seats, whipped the vote despite it being a highly ethical issue, which of course suggests to the rest of us that this vote was to prove independence from Westminster.
That's absolute nonsense. A long time was spent considering this, and many people's views were taken into consideration. In fact, everybody who responded, their points were carefully considered. In fact, I think only 8 people, voted against. People in all parties supported it, and it was certainly seen as a very important Labour proposal because we did put it to the people in our manifesto. And of course, we did win the majority percentage of the vote in Wales.
Why was the vote whipped?
Oh, I can't answer.
It wasn't necessary.
I can't answer that. It would have been won whether it was whipped or not, because this is something we feel, very strongly about.
Julie Morgan, can I just ask you the question, though? If a family strongly objects, what happens then?
If the person has made their views known that they want their organs to be taken, I think, obviously, that the wishes of that person are predominant. But the bill has changed as it's gone along to make sure that the views of relatives are certainly listened to and are taken into account, and it will be the clinician's decision about whether to go ahead, because obviously the relatives are in a situation of great upset and great shock, and it's very important that their views are considered, and it will be the clinician who will make that decision.
Yeah, the problem is you've got, at the time then you've told your loved ones just died, there's nothing more they can do. Your body starts to shut down, your mind starts to go as well, and you don't start to think clearly. You need to be aware of what factors that you want to go ahead with this. It resolves that situation. So what you have is, generally speaking, a lot of people, if they do not know the wishes of the person that's just died, they will say no to organ donation, because it makes all those problems go away. And we have a situation at the moment with the opt-in system. If somebody's on the register, the clinician can legally still take those organs, even if the family objects to it. But they'll never do that. They will never go against the wishes of the family. And you'll have the same situation with the opt-out. If they haven't opted out, the clinician will approach the family, and you've now got the situation they could view this as the state wanting to take the organs unless they fully appreciate what the loved one's wishes are. So the actual refusal rate may go up from the 40% we've got at the moment. It may go down even further because they look at it that way. So they will just say no, and the clinician will not go against it, even though legally they can take the organs. They won't do it.
And what was your personal experience, though?
My youngest son, Martin, died 10 years ago when he was age 16. He was a very loving child who was a caring people person, wanted to be a nurse. So our whole family thought it was definitely something Martin would have wanted to have done to help people with his death. So we didn't have an issue with it. So we're very for organ donation, but it's got to be done in the right way. You've got to. The Welsh Assembly, I give them something credit. If you read their information, they're going to do a lot of publicity about this, which they have to do, or else this will not work.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely.
Can I just get David Katz to respond to that?
The important point has just been made. We've heard about an organ donation. If the family are not given the position that they, as a bereaved family, can make a decision, is this a donation? It isn't a donation, it's organ removal. And to my mind, British society, and including Welsh society, has a tradition of blood donation. They have a tradition of bone marrow donation, and equally, organ donation should be regarded as a donation, something that the family are entitled to participate in and to contribute. I am extremely concerned to listen to information about one person dying or two people dying over a period of time. One has to compare that the Welsh Assembly is, after all, dealing with general health care in Wales, and as a priority, other issues in the general healthcare system should surely be their emphasis. The Spanish system is heavily geared, as we've heard, to a proper transplant coordination system rather than to and the opt-out system. That's why they've been successful. Why isn't the Welsh Assembly, first of all, looking at that? And they have an example in the UK, because in Scotland, with a better transplant coordinator system, they've increased the number of people on the registry to a considerable extent over the last few years.
Terry Mullins, how important is it for? One of the points raised there is that this is almost the antithesis of altruism. It's not. It's a forced donation. It's not altruistic at all. I mean, how important is that argument, do you think?
It's a bit like national service. If the country's in great danger, people are called up and have to do certain things to defend the country. If someone is very ill and dying, and someone else can, who's dead, of course, can donate an organ, then they ought to be taken, like the Welsh Assembly says, and that should be done without any argument at all. It's so essential. A good friend of mine had liver trouble and was on dialysis. She stood it for about a year, but it meant going to a certain place a long way from her home and going through this dialysis business. I've never seen it, but I think it's pretty horrible, in order to keep alive. And eventually she couldn't carry on with it. She more or less committed suicide. Now, if somebody had had a liver available for her, that would have avoided that terrible situation. Can I ask David a question? Would you accept a donation if your liver was in a bad way, or heart, or whatever else can be replaced? Would you accept it?
Would I accept personally accept a donation?
Yeah.
I personally would not accept a donation without consent.
Well, I'm talking of yourself.
Without
you
consent.
You rather die than not have a donation?
I would not accept an organ taken from somebody without consent. I'm afraid that's.
Well,
I really do feel. I do feel that is the case.
Well, I've only just met you, and I hope you'll go on for a long time. But it seems to me that was a ridiculous reply.
David, I mean, your response to that, and then we'll carry on.
It's interesting that it's not a ridiculous reply. There are a lot of people who say that they would like the person who's donating to give consent. I don't think I'd be unique at all.
I'm saying if there's one available, somebody's already donated it. Would you accept it? Because you don't approve of it.
No, that's a total misinterpretation.
I think what David has said, that he would accept it, but he wouldn't accept it if it was given without consent. I think that's what you were saying, David. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he would accept that. Okay, just to move on, I'd just like to ask Roger Goss from the campaign group Patient Concern. I suppose this is about a debate that isn't really being had, and it's about people confronting their mortality. Perhaps there is a value in what the Welsh Assembly has done. It's a step towards normalising giving life after a tragic death, and perhaps it may take time to have that embedded in our psyche, that the benefits of acting through altruism of giving organs after death, and it's something that we're not quite used to because the debate simply hasn't been had yet.
I would question the principle that you can normalise giving of organs. I think it's actually a very abnormal thing to do. It's wonderfully altruistic. As for the question of how to handle this effectively, I would offer two suggestions. We pushed very hard for the Welsh Assembly to introduce mandatory choice, which requires everybody over 18 who's mentally competent to say either they're willing to be a donor in the event the situation arises, or they're not, or they would prefer their family to have the choice. This was rejected as impossible, and I don't see why it is. That's the only way you can actually establish definitively what people want. And there is no moral issue with that. The second point is, I follow on what somebody else said. Yes, in Spain they have a presumed consent law and the highest rate of donation in the world, but they never implemented the law. They haven't got an opt-out register at all. And we suggested Another good thing the Welsh could do, if they're keen on this, is to have all their organ donor coordinators trained by the Spanish equivalents, who are extremely good at it. When they talk to relatives, only about 10%, I'm led to understand, decide against donation.
But Roger, your group, Patient Concern, does defend the rights of patients. What about defending the rights of the 8,000 or so people who are on this register waiting for organs? Yes, indeed, but they don't have a right. Nobody has a right to other people's spare parts any more than they have a right to their financial or material assets. We, of course, will get accused as a result of taking that view as being utterly selfish. But you can argue equally that it is pretty selfish to assume the right to other people's body parts, however desperately you may need them, if they don't want to give them.
Your assets are useful to you after you to your heirs once you've gone, but your spare parts are of no use to anybody, especially as they're likely to be burnt or buried in the ground anyway.
Can I make a comment on this?
Yes, Nigel, Burton.
With our charity, we have a lot of contact with recipients. It's part and parcel of our charity. You find recipients, even though they've had their organ, they're very grateful for that. But there's always a lot of guilt there with the recipients. The fact somebody's had to die for them to receive this organ. And what we have a system now with having to give the organ, what we do is we turn around to these people and say, no, you've not waited for people to die, because these people are going to die anyway. My son would have died no matter what happened. So you weren't waiting for him to die. You were waiting for the clinicians to identify him as a possible donor and waiting for them to ask the question, which we willingly gave those organs to make your life better. So you haven't waited for my son to die, because I've met the liver recipient of my son. He had a lot of guilt of getting a liver off a 16-year-old boy. But when we explained it in that way, that you weren't waiting for him to die, you were waiting for us to willingly give you that organ to make your life better and save your life, it sat a lot easier with him. If you go to a system where you can't fully understand that you've taken that organ and it's not being given, you haven't got that relief for the recipient anymore. He hasn't got that release from that guilt. Because have you just taken that organ just to satisfy that? It's not been a willing gift.
Julie Morgan, can I just ask you the question? I mean, there was a considerable body of opinion in Wales. I think it was over 90% of people who wanted a soft opt-out, soft option opt-out. Why not have that?
Well, I think that we've worked out the best system that we can in terms of all the different representations that were made to us. But I do think that some very important points have been made in the debate. And certainly this can't be introduced without a huge educational programme. And this will not actually be implemented for 2 years. And during that 2 years' time, there will be a great deal of education carried out about what's needed, the needs of people who are waiting for donors, for organs, and I think that is very, very important. And I hope that we will reach, the level of understanding with the population that many, many more people will make it clear.
So does that mean?
I think the actually bringing in this bill is sort of it crystallises it all, and I'm hoping that there will be a lot of people will use that register.
Julie Morgan, what about in 5 or 10 years' time? If donations have not gone up, will this be revisited? Do you think?
I think 5 years' time. We've said we will review it. Yes, I think that's part of.
So what we're going to have in the next 2 years is a blaze of publicity, a big public debate in Wales about the ethics of, basically raising awareness.
Yeah, we've been having that debate, over the last 2 years. There's been a big debate going on because there's been a lengthy consultation process. Some, very high-profile people have been against it, like I think you mentioned the Archbishop of Wales. He was opposed to it, and some other groups have been. But the overwhelming, all the sort of the focus groups, the polls, they've all shown that the vast majority of people in Wales support this. And since we passed it yesterday, I mean, people have been so thrilled who've, spoken to me on the street and have said, oh, thank you for doing that yesterday. They do see it as a very significant decision, and I think they see it as a very well thought out and considered decision, and after 5 years we will review it.
Terry Mullins.
I hope that not only the Welsh Assembly, but all the other legislatures in Britain will also come to this matter, because it's so important, and debate it, and hope to pass a law in favour of what you've already done. Could I suggest an amendment to your bill? If people don't want to opt in, or in fact want to opt out, that will be okay by me, but that would mean that they are not able to accept a donation. The only people who would get a donation or get a transplant would be the people who have agreed that their own parts could be transplanted. I think that would be very fair.
I wouldn't go along with that.
No, of course
Nigel, what would you think of that?
It's a comment I've heard quite a bit, and I can have a little bit of sympathy for it, but I do not agree with it.
No.
You can't work on a system like that. It's the same as you can't say, if you agree to organ donation, you can't say, right, I only want my organ to go to a white or an Asian or a person. You can't do that as a donor family.
No.
You agree to give your organs willingly to help society. Whether somebody would accept or not accept one is up to their conscience for them to deal with. It's not a medical issue. Medical people are there to help anybody they can. If we can make somebody better, we will do.
David Katz, I mean, you work on. You're a member of the Board of Deputies. You discuss some medical ethical issues all the time. I mean, is there some kind of, as far as you're concerned, an inherent integrity to the human body that needs to be respected?
Well, first of all, there is the integrity of the human body, but saving lives takes precedence over the integrity of human body. If it's a life-saving procedure, the Jewish position has been each case needs to be considered on its merits, and if you're saving lives, that takes the precedence. That's number one. But number two, one has to look at the reasons why people actually refuse when they're asked to opt in under the opt-in system. And I think that's being ignored completely in this discussion. The reasons why people refuse are different, but there's a great deal of evidence that this is due to social and cultural reasons rather than belief structures, and it's due to fears about what's being done to you or being done to your family member after they've died. And I think that one should not dismiss those views and regard those views as negative in society. And this does go to a Jewish point of view because, of course, it's the vulnerable. It's the vulnerable family who are recently bereaved who need to be taken into account.
Julie Morgan, what's your response to that? The families are in a very vulnerable state, perhaps not in the right frame of mind to make these kinds of decisions, or to veto any kind of donation of organs.
Well, I mean, I think it is a very important point, because obviously if there's been maybe an unexpected death as well, it's a very traumatic and very difficult time. And I mean, I think the way the Welsh legislation is worded is that the family cannot actually veto the giving of the organs, but the clinician can take into account their feelings. So if if a family was already traumatized and in a dreadful state, many of them, even if they were in that state, would still say yes, because it's something they may have thought of before, even if there hasn't been an actual entry on the donation list. So I think that they would want to do what they thought their relatives would want. So I think it would be possible to help. And I was very interested in what somebody said about learning to deal with this situation with families, and that somebody said that in Spain there was only 10% refusal by relatives. I don't know what the figure is here, but it seems that there is training and help should be given at that time, because otherwise the families may regret very much that they did not agree to the they spoke against the organs being donated, because I could imagine that could be a guilt thing as well later on in life. So it's very important that the people who are dealing with these situations do have the absolute training to try to put the case and to listen to what relatives are saying. And I think ultimately their clinician will make a decision on that.
Nigel, there's this term elective ventilation where bodies are kept alive with the possibility of their organs being removed. I mean, what about the ethics of that in terms of your group, the Donor Family Network?
That has been considered and talked about by the clinicians for a little while now. I've been involved with the NHS and they have done that. It's legal. You have to be very careful. You have to, as is said already, you have to look at individual case-by-case studies, whether it's worth it, whether it's going to be a viable option, because the longer you keep people on life-saving or keep going, things like ventilators and that lot, organs deteriorate. So you have to be very careful. It's not a decision you can suddenly say, yes, we'll do it in all cases. It's an individual case.
Because, Terry, the point is that you're saying if you're dead, you don't need your organs. But with elective ventilation, the argument goes is that it instrumentalizes people and it's not acting in their interests. It's not acting in the interests of the person who is not conscious.
The point is to look after the people who are alive, not the ones you're dead, you're dead.
But a decision has to be made on whether that person is alive or dead, and if they're being kept alive by a machine.
It's a very unusual situation. It doesn't happen that often, does it, Roger? I don't think so.
Roger, Roger Goss, is it an unusual situation?
I know the statistics on that specific point, but I do know there's a very keen debate in the medical profession on whether the practice is ethical or not, because the core principle of medical ethics is that you do nothing that is against the interests of the patient you're dealing with. And of course, this kind of ventilation is not in the interests of the patient per se. It may well be in the interests of somebody else if the organs get donated. I'd like to make one other point, if I may. I think the core result of this bill is, as the Assembly member rightly said, forgive me, I forget the name, I'm hopeless.
Julie Morgan.
Sorry, Julie, I'm hopeless in that way. The core point, and she makes right, is it puts all the responsibility with clinicians. Now, we have to be terribly careful that over-enthusiastic ones don't abuse it, because if that happens and relatives are outraged at the way they treat, the proverbial will hit the fan, and clinicians know that very well. That's why I can't imagine, hopefully, any clinician is going to try and force a trolley through a picket line to the operating theatre. So in that sense, although the relatives have no rights per se under this bill, common sense may prevail.
Common sense will prevail, David Katz, when it comes down to it. If a family is completely against the idea of organs being taken out of a loved one's body at the point of death, they won't be.
Do we really believe that? And more particularly, do we really believe that the more vulnerable members of society will not feel coerced by such a system? If you're the chairman of a Financial Times 100 company, you're more likely to be able to assert your opinion or your family's opinion with the clinicians than you are if you're a cleaner working in that company. It's quite simple, and we have to remember to look after the cleaner.
Nigel, what's your reaction to that? The vulnerable will be more susceptible to this.
It's a point. Yes, it's a valid point. But we're again talking about Spain. Why Spain's so good? They have 4 times more intensive care beds than we have in the UK. So it gives the clinicians more time to work with the family. You don't put the pressure on the family to make a decision so quickly. It gives the time for the family to get used to what's happened to them and then to think about it and to make a proper decision. That is one of the reasons why they do it so well to us. We have so few intensive care beds, there's always a pressure on the clinicians to get the decision, to get on with it. And if they don't do that, the family feel very pressured, so they don't make the decision. And if you go along this strong opt-out, that you're going to suddenly take the organ of that loved one against the family's wishes, as a gentleman has said, the proverbial will hit the fan, because the media are very good at these sort of stories. And negative feedback in the press like this has a devastating effect on organ donation rates for years afterwards. You can have all the positives as you like. One negative does so much damage, and you're, in this case, unless you get it right, you're opening yourself up to this very bad publicity, which will damage Welsh organ donation for a long time.
Julie Morgan, that's the danger, isn't it? Bad publicity, a couple of cases of organ donation that have gone wrong, perhaps could scupper this whole campaign.
Well, I think that is, a negative way of looking at it. I mean, I've got every confidence that the clinicians, with increased, education, increased training, with a big education push for all members of the public, that we certainly aren't starting out looking at it in that sort of way. We're starting out on, I know we're the first part of the UK to do this, but what we're looking at is the people on the waiting list and a system that will presume that the organs will be given. And I think that is, puts the basis for a very productive system where we have to come at it from every angle, to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen. Because, the intention is to improve the life chances of people whose lives are pretty miserable at the moment. David, your response?
There are two bits of evidence that the Welsh Assembly seems to have ignored, and I think our member of the Assembly is ignoring. One is Alder Hey, that the effect of the Alder Hey episode was to drop the donation rate. People were scared about what was being done to bodies of the people who died. That was number one. And number two, in 2007, there was a House of Lords Select Committee which looked at this, and the Spanish group gave their evidence to the House of Lords Select Committee. And they said the kinds of things that we've been saying here, that the system is not the success of opt-out. It's a system of better care for the bereaved people, as well as better care for their family, better care for the deceased person, as well as for the bereaved family. That is what has led to the increase in the availability of organs for the needs that we've heard are so desperate for some members of society.
Terry Mullins, final word to you. Could we see this rolled out across the UK?
David's wearing a very nice, expensive watch. It looks a very good one to me. Would he like that to be thrown away when he's dead, if he died? Or would it be kept and treasured and used by someone else? And if a watch can do that, I think your body parts can do it even 100% more, if not 500%.
But I hope my children will be able to decide about the watch.
We'll let them decide about your parts as well.
I'm happy for my children to decide about my parts. I'm happy for that.
Oh, you haven't sounded like it. I'm
happy for my children to decide. I don't want the state to decide.
Speaking of timepieces, we've run out of time, but I'd just like to finish by thanking my guests in the studio. Nigel Burton, Vice Chairman of the Donor Family Network, Professor David Katz, he's Emeritus Professor of Immunopathology, I'll get it right, at University College London, and also Terry Mullins, who's the Vice Chairman of the North London Humanist Group. On the line, Julie Morgan, member of the Welsh Assembly for Cardiff North, and Roger Goss, Director of the campaign group Patient Concern. Thank you very much for joining me, Brendan Cole, on The Voice of Russia in London.